Many years ago, and on more than one occasion, I was told that I couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time. Well, to prove my detractors from long ago wrong, I'm going to try to do the entire war in the East, placing the preservation opportunities the Trust now has into context of that entire war, and I'm going to try to do it in 5 minutes or less while I walk. I'm standing at the American Battlefield Trust's Mine Run battlefield. This is about in the middle of the Civil War, November of 1863, but I need to back up a little bit because I think you can understand at least the war in the East, is happening with rather few grand movements. Let's start outside Washington, D.C. with the Battle of Bull Run, after which armies are sort of getting ready and whatnot, and fast forward all the way into the spring of 1862, where you have Union Army moving out toward the peninsula. That will result in the Peninsula Campaign. In the meantime, you have Union and Confederate forces fighting out in the Shenandoah Valley, and eventually those forces from the Shenandoah, at least many of the Confederates, are going to join the new budding Army of Northern Virginia under Robert E. Lee, his predecessor Joseph E. Johnston having been wounded in the Battle of Fair Oaks or Seven Pines. Of course, Lee comes, that results in the 7 Days battles against George McClellan. I think you've heard of these before: Beaver Dam Creek, Gaines's Mill, a little bit of Savage Station, White Oak Swamp, Fraser Farm, Glendale, Malvern Hill. And, in which the Union changes their base and move back toward the James River. Robert E. Lee, feeling good, doesn't see Richmond as under threat, lashes out into the north. That results in the Battle of Cedar Mountain and the Battle of Second Manassas. He goes a little further into Maryland, the Maryland Campaign, South Mountain, Harper's Ferry, the Battle of Antietam, where Lee will be turned back there, and at Shepherdstown, Lee goes back down toward Virginia. That will move the armies back toward the south a little bit, resulting in the battles of Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville. Lee's feeling good again. He's going to invade the north. Now the Union, no longer under McClellan, no longer under Burnside, no longer under Hooker, at least partway through the march, will result in the battles, of course, at Brandy Station, Aldie, Middleburg, Upperville, a number of smaller engagements up closer to and in the north, resulting and culminating in the Battle of Gettysburg, where Robert E. Lee and George Gordon Meade fight it out. Meade wins. Lee goes back down to Virginia, and this war is going to go on for a couple more years. That brings us to our area of operations right here. We have a lot of people, I think, thinking that after the Battle of Gettysburg, then you have the Overland Campaign, and nothing happened for those 10 months. Well, that's not true, and you do have some things happening, not the least of which is the Bristow Campaign, not too far from here, as well as the Mine Run Campaign. Before the winter sets in, here in these woods and in the broad surrounding area, the Army of the Potomac and the Army of Northern Virginia will engage in mortal combat here. We're on the Trust's Payne's Farm battlefield, where the most substantial fighting took place at Mine Run in late November of 1863. Now, as part of that fighting, in the land we're trying to preserve, more than 700 acres that will be put under easement. There's cavalry engagements over there. Luckily for the soldiers over there, not intense heavy combat, but a little bit more land that needs to be saved, and we hope that those acreage can add to the Mine Run story. Now, some of that same land skipped through the winter. They winter at Brandy Station and then skip through that winter until the following spring. The Battle of the Wilderness will open in early May of 1864, and some of that same Mine Run land is now wilderness land, where you have cavalry forces fighting there again. After the Battle of the Wilderness, I think you know what's going to happen. You've got Spotsylvania, you've got Totopotomoy, Cold Harbor, and then they move on to Petersburg. And after some of these initial fights at Petersburg, and I'm talking about a lot of them, both in June and into July, and we're talking about on both sides of the James River, the Battle of the Crater, first Deep Bottom, second Deep Bottom, as the Union is trying to extend and besiege Petersburg as best as they can. You're going to have the Union engage with the Confederates in a series of offensives, both north of the James, south of the James, and one of those offensives is going to happen at Reams Station, where we can save nearly another 100 acres. And that's very important. That's a battlefield that is nearly complete, or I'll say just about substantially complete. How about that? So that will be good. And then the extension of the lines continues at places like the Weldon Railroad and Boyden Plank Road, October of 1864, where we have the opportunity to save more acreage there. That's also close to the White Oak Road battlefield. Around that same time, you have fighting at a place called Peebles Farm along Church Road, and to the west of there, we have the chance to save some of the Peebles Farm battlefield as well. Now, we continue onward a little bit until that winter goes on. Some of that Boyd and Plank Road land is also right next to and overlapping with the Hatcher's Run battlefield, February of 1865. And then with the spring comes Union's final offensive there. That final offensive will include a number of engagements. So let me cover first March 25th, 1864, the Battle of Jones Farm. Very little known, but we have a chance to save some of that. It's the same as the Peebles Farm land that we have going on there, and we're especially excited about how little land we have left to save in this area, and I'm going to talk about this one just a little bit more. In the meantime, you have other fights going on. I think you've heard of them. White Oak Road, as well as the Battle at Dinwiddie Courthouse. You know, just in the closing hours of the Civil War, we're talking about into these battles late March and into early April of 1865, and on April 2nd, 1865, then you have the breakthrough. See, at Jones Farm a week earlier, the Union was able to capture some key Confederate picket lines, and that's going to foster and allow the breakthrough, which also took place along that same piece of land that we can save at Peebles Farm and Jones Farm. So that's a 3 battlefield property we can get there. I think you know what happens after the breakthrough. Petersburg falls, Richmond falls, Lee flees west, and that will result in the Battle of Sailors Creek and eventually the Battle of Appomattox Station, fighting in Appomattox Courthouse and Lee's surrender. I think I was going to try to do this in 5 minutes. This looks like 6.5. We really hope you'll share this with your friends, that you'll click the links and learn a little bit more about these opportunities and get involved if you can. And even if you can't, we really appreciate you watching and for your past and future support of battlefield preservation and education.